So you are aware. If I'm checking to see, we usually ask you to put your names in the chat, but there's so many of us today, I think we're going to try a different approach. So thank you very much. If you do have questions during the presentation, please place those in the chat box and we'll review them during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. I just wanted to give you a quick update on the status of our activities. The activities are listed there on the right, and you can see that facilitate a monthly information webinars, and that is our 3DHP monthly forum. You can find all of the forums. There's recordings, there's slides, as well as a Q&A from each forum, and you can find those at the NSGIC Learning link. You will have to log in to do that. And we're excited to announce we're going to have for those of you that are not NSGIC members but need a login, we're going to be able to facilitate that shortly. Established communities at mynsgic.org. We have both a FTN interest group, which is a general interest group. And I'm pleased to announce we'll be having an interest group meeting on December 15th. And then the working group is a group of folks that are actively participating in Project Task. And I'm just about to send out to you the critical factors compilation for you to review and respond on. So watch for that coming soon. Oops. Okay. We also inventory state and regional experiences. If you have done work in EDH or 3DHP, please go to the inventory and contribute some information there. Phil's developed a survey 123 for that activity. I mentioned earlier the 3D hydrography critical factors, and we're using the term critical factors because we're talking about your questions, your issues, your resource needs, just a lot of different things. We had a great workshop at the annual meeting, and we got some information, and that is what we're currently compiling for review by the 3DHP working group. We're also, after we identify the critical factors, our next step will be to derive resources that can meet the needs identified in the critical factors. And then our final task is to establish a NSGIC 3DHP info hub. Phil has been working steadily on that, and it is coming soon. I hope we will actually be profiling that at the interest group meeting next month. And with that, I'm glad to announce that we have today with us Dr. Megan Lang and Sydney Thielke with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they will be talking about concurrent mapping of NWI and NHD. And as I said earlier, obviously an interesting topic given the number of participants we have. Megan or Sydney, whoever's running, I'm going to stop sharing, and you should be able to share your slides now.
Okay, wonderful. This is Megan. I'm going to get going. I'm going to start with sharing my slides. Oh, it says that I cannot start screen share while other participant is sharing.
I thought I stopped. All right, try now.
How does that look? Can you
That is
see?
outstanding. Beautiful.
Okay. Excellent. So Linda, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you so much for this opportunity to provide an update on NWI's collaborative work with the National Geospatial Program in support of the 3D National Terrain Model. As I mentioned, I'm Megan Lang, and I'm going to be tag teaming this presentation with my colleague, Sydney Thielke. So I'm NWI's chief scientist, and I am in headquarters, so I'm in Northern Virginia. And then Sydney is our Alaska Regional Wetlands Coordinator. So of course, she's calling in from Alaska. So we're pretty far apart physically, but we get to collaborate a lot, and I'm very lucky for that. So we'll be tag teaming this presentation. Okay, so I'll start by providing a brief background on the NWI program. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the principal U.S. federal agency tasked with providing information to the American public on the extent of U.S. wetlands, as well as wetland change through time. We're mandated to produce these data through the Emergency Wetlands Resources Act of 1986, and we meet our mandates for mapping through production of the NWI geospatial dataset. In the past, this dataset was called NWI maps. And our mandate to track wetland change, we meet that through provision of wetland status and trends reports to Congress. And we are in the midst of producing our next status and trends report. However, for this particular presentation, I am going to focus on our geospatial data set, which again, in the past, when the data were analog, were called our NWI maps. So our NWI geospatial data are identified by the Federal Geographic Data Committee and the U.S. Office of Management and Budget as the wetlands layer of the National Geospatial Data Infrastructure. I realize that this is a lot of titles, a lot of acronyms, might sound like word soup, but what's being implied is that the NWI dataset serves an important role within our nation's national spatial data infrastructure, an infrastructure that is intended to create and provide the geospatial knowledge required to understand, protect, and promote America's national and global interests. So this figure shows a categorically simplified version of the NWI geospatial dataset. So lakes are mapped in dark blue, woody wetlands are shown in dark green, and wetlands with herbaceous or non-woody vegetation can be seen in light green. So this just gives you a general sense of how wetlands are distributed across the nation. And our maps are complete for CONUS, and that really allows you to see kind of how our wetland resources differ across the US. Of course, our data are much more detailed than this, but this is just a nice overview. So the NWI dataset, it provides our nation's most spatially and categorically detailed information on wetlands. It is currently available for the conterminous US, as I mentioned, but also Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, Hawaii, the Pac Trust Territories, and over 40% of Alaska. And you know, we are disappointed that we don't have Alaska completely mapped, but Sydney is working very, very hard to do so. And we're getting close. So that 40% is going to increase quickly over the next several years. So stay tuned. And Sydney will tell you more about all of our mapping efforts in Alaska. So creation of the NWI dataset has taken a substantial amount of effort, in particular teamwork. To date, it's taken over 40 years, $220 million, and support from over 165 contributors to produce the wetlands data layer. We work with stakeholders to map or update between 50 and 100 million acres of NWI data annually, ensuring that FGDC's high standards are met. The NWI wetlands layer is a critical part of our nation's geospatial water data infrastructure, which also includes NHD. These data are the foundation of critical decisions being made every day by governments, the private sector, and individuals. They make strategic decisions possible on topics ranging from climate change resilience to infrastructure development to clean drinking water and food security. NWI data are used to enable next generation decision support through techniques like landscape scale wetland functional assessment. You know, a few decades ago, you know, folks seemed satisfied to simply know that a wetland was there and what type of wetland it was. But nowadays, folks want to know, you know, what functions does it provide? What benefits does it provide? And this helps them make informed decisions. And so our data allows this capability. Let's see. So even though the NHD and the NWI, they are really foundational data sets that are used by a tremendous number of stakeholders, and they have been the foundation of, our water data infrastructure for decades. They are, unfortunately, they don't fully meet today's critical decision support needs. And this is partially because these data sets have been developed separately over decades to meet divergent mandates. And this makes it challenging to effectively leverage these data within one system. In addition, water data, NWI, NHD, they may not be complete across all of the US, or might not be contemporary for some geographies, or they may be lacking in sufficient detail to support certain critical decisions. So we recognize this, and in response, the NWI program has been working in collaboration with the National Geospatial Program to modernize and better align wetland and hydrography products. This work began in Alaska, so Sydney will outline some of the work going on there before I address our national initiative. So Sydney, I'm going to continue to serve up the slides, but I'm just going to turn to your slide next and stop talking, and I'll continue to forward your slides whenever you tell me to do so.
All right, go ahead and go to the next slide, Megan. Thank you very much. Just turning my camera on very briefly to give everybody a hello, and then I'll turn it off just to save a little bit of bandwidth. But as Megan said, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you all today. And thank you, Megan, for that great intro on National Wetlands level with NHD and NWI. And it's not very often that someone from Alaska gets to say that we're setting the stage for something. So with just a little bit of the background on Alaska mapping in general, this graphic from Bells, Alaska gives that general idea of how big of an area we deal with when we talk about mapping Alaska. And so it probably shouldn't come as a surprise that along with our size, our remote global position, our low population density, and our extreme climatic conditions have historically kept Alaska really undermapped. Around 2008, though, federal officials realized that there was a lack of accurate spatial data that was leading to safety, environmental, and economic concerns. Here was a state producing significant amounts of oil and gas, running large mining operations, 60% federal land ownership, and we can't even get our topo maps correct, let alone accurately map our shoreline, our wetlands, and river corridors. And so the need for improved data was obvious, but how are we going to get there? Fortunately, USGS, the Bureau of Land Management, and the state of Alaska were true catalysts for a mapping revolution in Alaska. And they led the charge for a statewide geospatial data needs assessment to be conducted. And the results were what we expected. Alaska needed to build a geospatial portfolio from the ground up. Elevation and imagery needed to form the foundation. Then framework data sets like NHD, NWI, and shoreline could be produced, and those would support future end products and analytical needs. It seemed like a great plan. We were building on lessons learned from the lower 48, and we had a straightforward path, but we needed leadership to keep things organized and ensure we could continue moving forward. And so two leadership organizations, which I will reference repeatedly in the coming slides, were formed shortly after completion of that needs assessment. The first is the Alaska Mapping Executive Committee, or AMEC, and the second is the Alaska Geospatial Council, or the AGC. The AMEC was really chartered to coordinate the development of federal, statewide geospatial data layers, and is currently co-chaired by the USGS and NOAA. The AGC was chartered to not only be a voice for the state of Alaska to the AMEC, but also to bring together thematic technical working groups that could tackle statewide, regional, and community mapping issues. That is chaired by the Alaska Department of Natural Resources Commissioner Corey Feige, and really organized by the Alaska State Geospatial Information Officer, Leslie Jones, who many of you know. So the AMEC and the AGC have truly been the guiding light for mapping Alaska, and they're keeping us moving forward to construct the framework and ensure that we acquire the data that we need. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this needs assessment proposed a completely new geospatial portfolio, and starting with statewide imagery and elevation collections. So the AMEC and the AGC were at the helm of those projects and bringing partners together to develop these data sets. The decision was made to collect a 5-meter IFSAR product for elevation because it was the most economical choice. Not only would it not be thwarted by our difficult weather conditions, but it was an efficient option given the broad geographic scope of Alaska. And that $66 million investment has proved to be an incredible upgrade from our old 30-meter dead data. Like this example, where an area that previously looked like a lake, we can now distinguish as complex river channels. On the imagery front, the first statewide digital imagery mosaic was a 2.5-meter pan-sharpened Spot 5 collection that was completed in 2015. A huge upgrade from Landsat being the only other digital image collection available. So it was a wonderful step forward, but the AMEC and the AGC have continued to push the needle forward and recently acquired a statewide 0.5-meter pan-sharpened 4-band mosaic from Maxar. And the completion of the statewide imagery and elevation have done a strong foundation for us to now build subsequent derivative products. Next slide. So that brings us back to the topic at hand, which is NHD and NWI, which are often considered essential layers in any planning or analysis project. The needs assessment I mentioned earlier repeatedly highlighted the vital nature of NWI and NHD on multiple fronts. And so the AMEC has identified these data sets as important mapping layers, and those are included in their tactical planning initiatives, and their progress is tracked over an 18-month timeframe. And the AGC has technical working groups for both wetlands and hydrography that prioritize development and completion of these statewide data layers. Overall, the NHD and the NWI are valuable economic assets for Alaska and provide information on safety and long-term sustainable planning of our vast resources. Just a couple of examples. Our prime energy sector on the North Slope is conducted on wetlands, and they draw large amounts of fresh water to create ice roads that are used for crossing the frozen tundra. Our conservation, habitat, and climate modeling need data sets like the NWI and NHD to develop baseline metrics and that will feed into future planning scenarios. After all, we can't make informed decisions about research. And lastly, the NWI and the NHD are repeatedly used to train not only automated scripts, but in-house technicians to generate other widely used data sets like the USGS National Land Cover database, the NRCS Soil Survey, and NOAA's Coastal Change Analysis Program, where it exists. Next slide. So around 2012, we were at a point where we had this foundational data of imagery and elevation coming in the door, and we had the justification and the needs assessment for why we should be moving forward with NHD and NWI data production. At this time, the NWI for Alaska was about 40% complete, as Megan said, and that's at a 1 to 63,000 scale of data. And the NHD had statewide 1 to 63,000 data as well. But for both programs, the information within those databases was initially generated using analog methodologies and digitized as technology advanced, and neither was rooted in contemporary generation practices or strong positional control. One of the best examples that's been used over and over again was some GPS tracking devices were put on some salmon swimming upstream to spawn. And when they plotted that over the existing data sets, those fish were over half a mile from the actual NHD stream location, no wetlands or refugia habitat to be found. So we really needed need to get our data rooted in that strong positional control. So the AGC technical working groups for wetlands and hydrography summarize that current picture I talked about above and started to chart the path forward with their eyes on completed standard compliant products by 2029 and 2030. This included completing Alaska's NWI at varying scales between 1 to 24,000 and 1 to 63,000, as well as a comprehensive remap of the national hydrography data sets at a 1 to 24,000 scale. So initially, each program received funding for projects, and those were developed independent of another. And we were all very excited to be checking off the boxes and coloring our maps with data under development. And as you can see on these maps, the yellows, greens, and blues are areas where NWI and NHD programs do have projects in place for updates or new data creation. But with the need for so much updating and not an aligned approach, Fish and Wildlife Service began working directly with USGS and our data producers to explore options for simultaneous generation of the NWI and the NHD in 2015. Next slide. So the purpose of these concurrent mapping updates was really twofold. The first one was we knew that we needed to deliver comprehensive hydrologic information to the Fish and Wildlife Service staff for planning and conservation needs. My predecessors understood the interrelationship between the wetlands and hydrography in a place like Alaska and the importance of needing that whole picture for functional assessments and making planning decisions about our trust resources, which include fisheries, migratory birds, and subsistence food sources like blueberries. And we needed that information to come in at or near the same time. The second purpose was to reduce overall costs associated with mapping wetlands and hydrography and seek out opportunities to improve alignment of the data. And so we had 3 concurrent mapping projects initiated between 2015 and 2017 that generated truly concurrent NHD and NWI compliant data according to the specifications at the time of contracting. Those included Selawik National Wildlife Refuge in dark gray in the northwest portion of Alaska, the lower Kuskokwim portion of Yukon Delta National Wildlife Refuge, which is in green, in the western part of Alaska, and the Arctic coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge up in the northeast corner of Alaska. Each of those projects focused on generating 1 to 24,000 scale NHD and NWI data. More recently, we've implemented a project in South Central Alaska, which includes Kodiak Island and the nearby Shelikof Strait watershed. That's the furthest south green area that you see. And that will also complete concurrent NWI and NHD at 1 to 24,000. But that project uses the newest specifications for national hydrography data sets that requires the data to be predominantly based off of the IFSAR. So with every project that we implement, we learn lessons to carry forward. And so I also want to give an honorable mention to projects that we're just working on right now in the Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound area, which is that large area of dark blue, as well as the Kobuk Valley, which is the large portion of blue in the northwest corner of the state. Those projects are not actually concurrent NWI and NHD development, but rather those are NWI projects that are being implemented because of the delivery time of the high resolution IFSAR-based NHD project, NHD. So as we've moved through this process, we have a much better understanding about how using high resolution NHD increases the efficiency of the NWI mapping. And we do look forward to using that workflow wherever possible because we had that disconnect of moving independent projects forward early on in our planning phase. Next slide. So the last thing I just want to summarize before I turn things back over to Megan is the general workflow that we've been using on these concurrent projects in Alaska. And our data producers body features. Where possible, they're incorporating the break lines that were delivered with the IFSAR in order to improve efficiency, and those are used for the polygonal open water features. The data doesn't need to be in final NHD format before they can be used in the NWI. So even those initial linear data sets that are developed can be very helpful and improve efficiencies. Once those linears are generated, they undergo extensive refinement and error checks before being finalized for the NHD. And while that's underway, the data producers on the NWI side of things begin generation of our open water polygon, lake, and pond boundaries. So then the producers are able to proceed with delineating the vegetated wetlands on the NWI side, while the finalization is happening of the data on the NHD side. Wherever possible, data producers are looking to reconcile the data and produce coincident line work. However, given our independent standards and specifications between the NWI and the NHD, we're not at a point where we always have coincident line work at this point. And so the QC processes are still happening independently with the respective agency. This model for Alaska, and we're really excited that nationally this has gained some attention and there's exploration of better alignment of the data sets for CONUS. We recognize that there is going to need to be some different workflows in order to meet the standards and specifications, but we do hope the initial work that we've done here has set a path forward for what's possible, and we look forward to a bright future of better alignment and interoperability. And so with that, I'll turn things back over to Megan.
Thank you very much, Cindy, for that wonderful overview of all the great work going on in Alaska. And you and your colleagues have really set the stage for what we're doing nationally. And so that is what I'm going to talk about now. So as you mentioned, water data really is important. So today's high priority challenges really do require comprehensive, contemporary, interoperable water data. And these challenges that those data support include those related to climate change, water quality, infrastructure, development, food security, et cetera. There's just really a long list of applications that these data are just absolutely critical for. So while the nation has relied on the current NHD and NWI for decades, we do feel like we can bring much greater value to users if we approach future data design and production in tandem. So the NWI program and the National Geospatial Program together. As co-leads of the OMB A16 National Geospatial Data Asset Water Inland Theme, and I know that's a mouthful, but this is where the USGS and the Fish and Wildlife Service have coordinated on NHD and NWI for many years on behalf of the NSGIC. And we've been doing it for many years, but we recently, as I mentioned, ramped up that coordination, and part of that is due to the Geospatial Data Act of 2018, which further guides our work by emphasizing the importance of data interoperability, coordination, partnerships, and standards. So the National Wetlands Inventory Program and the National Geospatial Program, are stepping up engagement, and we've prioritized modernizing the NWI and initiating the 3D Hydrography program as a hydrography component of the 3D National Topography Model. We feel that doing so will not only improve the effectiveness of both data sets, but will also enhance data production cost and time efficiencies. We have plans to modernize and align all aspects of data management, from planning and outreach to data standards and distribution. This effort will not only save money, but will result in data that are much easier to use and then more reliable outputs from your decision support tools. We're working to fully leverage past investments, including those in imagery and elevation. Full implementation of our plan will necessitate significant investment, and we're not quite there yet. But we have begun to lay the foundation for this transformation through technical and program development, including the initiation of pilot projects, which I'll talk about in just a bit. So in addition to the collaboration between the service and USGS, we're also moving forward with building the future of water data by better aligning the expertise and purview of other federal agencies and partners at multiple levels, including the agency, interagency, and sub-cabinet levels, with coordinated planning and documentation at each step. So, this really is an all-encompassing, robust effort that's built on years of coordination and communication. But that communication and coordination is much more robust now than it has been in the past. So as I mentioned, we're working to align all aspects of data management, including specifications and workflows. We've identified 9 types of technical opportunities that we'd like to address to improve interoperability between NWI and NHD, and you can see them listed here. So these include currency, uniqueness, completeness, connectivity, consistency, stability, interoperability, accuracy, and spatial resolution. And I realize that this seems like a compact list, but a lot of time and effort went into generating this list, and a lot of discussion time between the programs. And we feel like it is important to address these 9 factors moving forward. So NWI, so I guess I have been talking about, discussions between NWI and NHD and kind of providing an overview of where we're headed. But now I really want to talk about what NWI is doing at this time. So we have begun to move forward with the goal of improving cost effectiveness and nationwide utility of our data through greater leveraging and interoperability with USGS hydrography products. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about, what we are doing and talk about pilot projects, as I mentioned. But before I do so, I really do feel like it's vital to clarify our existing FGDC wetland standard. Doing so not only facilitates understanding, but it also helps to ensure that NWI data can be produced most cost effectively. So current FGDC endorsed minimum mapping standards are listed here. These, of course, aren't all of our standards. That's a pretty long document, but these are just a few critical standards that I feel like are important to state up front. So those standards include that in the CONUS, Hawaii, and US territories, features greater than ½ an acre must be mapped. And also narrow features, including streams, must be mapped when they're greater than 15 feet wide. In Alaska, things are a little bit different because Alaska is just a different kind of place. So in Alaska, features over 5 acres must be mapped, along with narrow features that are greater than 80 feet wide when mapping at a 5-acre targeted mapping unit. So I would encourage you to reach out to our regional wetlands coordinators, including Sydney, with any questions regarding our standards. They can help to interpret them and apply them and to ensure that they are being achieved. Please also note that although these are our standards, these are our minimum standards, and funders can choose to map beyond these standards, but we want to make sure that we do so in a coordinated manner. So again, I would encourage you to reach out to NWI coordinators in your region, when you're planning mapping projects, including deciding on what specifications to move forward with in terms of your projects. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, we have begun to move forward with improving our interoperability with NHD, and we've identified early steps to move us towards this towards this interoperability, but these steps were identified because they are also feasible given current budget resources. So an initial step is one that you see illustrated in this slide. We're working to transition away from the inclusion of narrow linear habitats within the NWI polygonal layer. These non-vegetated features that are less than 15 feet wide and are typically they are typically streams and ditches. So instead of including these narrow linear habitats in our polygonal layer, we plan to store and provide these data in a separate linear layer, which would eventually be superseded by 3D hydrography program features. And again, we've got a memo that provides additional details. There'll be additional guidance documents soon. So if you're interested in this initial step towards greater interoperability with NHD, please do reach out to us. We're working to develop the workflows and specifications to support this initial change through pilot projects, including pilots in southeastern coastal Texas, Indiana, Pennsylvania, California, and Oregon. All of the projects will use 3D hydrography program pilot data or a very similar product to ensure interoperability with future 3D hydrography program products. The first two projects listed on the slide are either contracted or just about contracted. The second two projects will be contracted after we receive the 3D hydrography program pilot data for these geographies. As we work towards better alignment between wetland and hydrography data sets, we've identified a few take-homes that we believe are relevant for states. First, of course, planning is essential, especially relevant to understanding your information needs and resources and translating those needs into data that best meets your needs. It is important to consider your needs for spatial, temporal, and categorical resolution relative to national data standards. Please reach out to NWI if there are any opportunities to better align your needs with our specifications, but understand that mapping beyond our standards will likely incur additional costs, and national consistency is also important. So we do need to balance those things. Our data are non-regulatory, but are often used to support planning for field-based regulatory assessments. In fact, millions of dollars a year are saved by states that use our data in this way. Millions of dollars a year are also saved by the private sector in terms of using our data to assist with regulatory planning as well. But again, our data are not regulatory. So when planning NWI projects, keep in mind that these data are built upon elevation and imagery. The better the input data, the better the resultant NWI maps. But most importantly, your involvement is essential to the long-term success of NWI. And we believe NWI will support your long-term information needs, allowing you to make more strategic natural resource decisions. With this in mind, please let us know how we can best support you. We can assist in many ways. For example, if resources aren't available to remap an entire state, we can help you target areas of greatest need and suggest funding sources to expand your project area through time. So this is our last slide, and this is just a summary of our presentation. As we mentioned, the service and the USGS are committed to working with federal, state, tribal, and private partners to build the information infrastructure necessary to address some of our most urgent challenges related to human health and safety, economic development, and conservation. We're working together to better address today's emerging information needs by modernizing NWI and initiating the 3D hydrography program. Doing so will provide better, cheaper data to meet your decision support needs. Success in this endeavor will depend on strong communication and partnerships, and we very much welcome your engagement, both with planning a more interoperable future for water data sets and collecting data for your state. So thank you very much for your time, and I've included our emails on this slide. And I would encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions after this webinar, or if we can assist you in any way. And Linda, that's it in terms of our presentation. I know you have a long list of questions too.
We do. I'll leave your slide up just for a second so people make sure they can get that contact information. And with that, I'll ask folks to please enter their questions into the chat. And we'll ask Phil Worrell. He will moderate those questions. So
we
Phil?
have one. Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. They're scrolling really quick. Let me back up here. My chat box is moving on me. Jim Giuliano questioned, do you have any preliminary estimates of how this integrated approach saves money?
This is Sydney, and
Go ahead.
I'd be happy to tackle that one for Alaska. Our estimates, working with our vendors that have done large portions of our concurrent mapping, are about a 20% cost savings. One of the challenges with Alaska is we often have a moving target in terms of how much of a project is tied to the fieldwork component of that particular project. And so it can be a little bit more difficult to hammer down the specifics, but we do think we're saving about 20% of the upfront costs when these projects are done concurrently. Part of that also comes down to the just kind of the time and energy it takes to manage contracts and agreements on our end as well. We are still confident that there is a cost savings on NWI projects that are completed shortly after the NHD. So if we're still using that linear approach for updated NHD data feeding into the NWI, we're still seeing cost savings. We just estimate that that's probably closer in the 10 to 15% range, not as high as that 20% for the concurrent projects.
Great. And I would invite Jim, if you want to come off a chat and follow up on that, or actually anyone as we go through these questions, to if I butcher your question or we don't get a complete answer, please feel free to come off chat and continue the conversation with our presenters. Okay, next question. Oh, I'm going to butcher this name, from Joel Osuna Williams. Question is, up to this point, have you all developed crosswalks that tie feature type classifications from the NWI to the NHD and vice versa? If so, what documentation is available to the public?
Do you want to, I guess, speak for Alaska, and then I can jump in for CONUS?
Sure. I mean, at this point, we don't have a crosswalk in terms of classifications for the NWI and to the NHD, specifically because we're just using coordinate classifications when we're conducting the NWI. So I think future ties in terms of stream order or making some type of inference to what NHD linear feature might equate to in the NWI. I think that has been discussed, but nothing has been finalized at this point. The one thing I would say is that while we don't have a crosswalk per se, the incorporation of the NHD and the NWI into like the LLWW functional system, I think that has been refined a lot more in terms of how to integrate those and use the functional classification depending on if an NWI or an NHD linear feature is actually flowing through, how to make some of those inferences. So Megan, I'll turn that over to you for anything additional.
Yeah, I would agree with you in terms of the LLW functional assessment. It's not something that we directly host in terms of the LLWW data, but our program was certainly instrumental in creating that assessment approach. And of course, our data are foundational for that functional assessment. And LLWW does bring together the two data sets, and the methods to do so have been developed and are robust. I could put you in touch with some of our producers or others that have developed tools, semi-automated tools to do so, to bring the data sets together in that way for that purpose. In terms of crosswalks between the data set, we don't have a formal crosswalk. Nothing's been published, but we have done a lot of work to kind of suss out the relationship between the various features, and some of that has gone into helping to produce our data. So while we don't have a formal crosswalk, if you had specific questions, I'd imagine we could help address them.
Could you please define the acronym, the LLWW? Or what that was?
So a lot of people actually know it as NWI plus. Is that more familiar? We're just trying to get away from that moniker.
And so what does LLWW stand for?
Let's see. I'm afraid I'm going to butcher it, Sydney. Can you look that up really quickly?
You can put it in chat later.
Okay,
I don't wanna
I'll
put you on
do
the
that.
spot.
I have it. It is landscape position, landform, water flow path, and water body type is the classification system. And there's essentially kind of a dichotomous key that exists for putting that classification into kind of the NWI polygonal data as an additional attribute.
Sarah just entered the translation of LLWW into the chat, so you have it there too.
Great, thank you. Question from Josh Greenberg. Does NWI have regional and/or state contacts similar to the USGS program, like the data stewards?
And Sydney, before I saw this is Becky. Hi, this is Becky Anderson from USGS. I saw that you responded in chat, and I was just going to state, because you responded with Fish and Wildlife Service personnel, and the personnel that Josh is asking about are at the states, and they're a part of our stewardship program where we have agreements with states to help update and manage the NHD. And so he's asking, I think, Josh, if I got this right, you're asking if there's anybody, if there's like a network of people with agreements with Fish and Wildlife Service at the state level who are working on wetland mapping with you directly.
Yep, so we don't have a formal network with formal agreements. You know, of course, we have our national coordinators, and these are Fish and Wildlife Service staff. They have regional expertise, but in terms of our state partners, we work very closely with states. You know, we certainly talk a lot to our state partners, but we don't necessarily have formal agreements that they provide kind of a similar service to what NHD has.
Okay, moving on. From Christopher Smith, you mentioned functional wetlands assessment. What are the plans to include landscape position, which are critical to functional assessment, but are not currently supported?
So in terms of LLWW, we don't formally support the development of the assessment approach. We are working very closely with other federal agencies to try to expand assessment techniques, improve assessment techniques, leverage resources, that sort of thing. But you know, in terms of improving the assessment protocols themselves, that's not something that we directly engage in. It's something that our stakeholders engage in. And so if you would send me an email with, you know, the specifics in terms of what specific landscape positions you're interested in, I could reach out to some of my key contacts and get your question answered.
one thing I would like to add, this is Sydney, before we move on with this question, is that we do have a number of projects in Alaska where an ancillary deliverable, in addition to the NWI or the NHD, is the LLWW, which includes that attribute for landscape position. That's true for our Selawik project, and it'll be true for our Cusco Quad project as well. And so we are working with the Alaska Geospatial Council because the NWI program does not host that data, to ensure that it does get hosted somewhere. So that is one of the other things I think that can be explored, is when we produce the kind of the supplemental attribution information that isn't supported by the NWI delivery system, what is the collaboration that can happen at a state level to make sure that is still efficiently disseminated out to the public and to the end user that is really interested in that type of information. And one of the benefits of including that in those particular contracts is that we do wind up with that coincident data alignment. And so though they don't have to be done as completely separate data, the geometry remains the same, but we just have those additional attribute data data pieces that are included in the final product. And like I said, we're working with the state to get those hosted through their systems.
Okay. Let me scroll back here. I've lost the question. Okay. Do you have contract templates for integrated mapping that you can share?
This is Sydney again, and I do have contract templates. I'm learning the ins and outs of what is allowed and what is not allowed, but I'm pretty sure that the RFPs that we've developed in Alaska at the preliminary level could be shared out. I just have to check on a couple of things with that, but they could be a great starting point. I also have a lot of lessons learned in terms of things I might have done a little bit different in terms of how I wrote those up, but I'd be happy to kind of get the specifics and follow up with that example for folks that are interested in pursuing that type of information and not having to start from scratch.
And we have similar information for CONUS. I would imagine, what goes into our SOWs would be probably most relevant. And so we've got kind of different flavors of projects and therefore different flavors of SOWs. And if you reach out to us, again, Sydney or I can help provide that language to you.
And if I can just interrupt here, we will work with the presenters to develop a Q&A document. It'll give them opportunity to go back and look at these questions, add additional information, and if reasonable, to add links. So we'll capture that through the Q&A document. Thank you to you both. Back to you, Phil.
Another question from Jim. How will future USGS 3DHP funding be integrated with NWI funding to support integrated mapping projects? For state partners, will this be separate agreements with USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service, or can we bundle coverage?
We're still working to figure that out. We certainly have producers that can map both hydrography and wetlands. So we're hoping that there will be some efficiencies to be gained. But Becky, I wonder if you want to speak to this.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I'll just add, I was going to say what Megan said. So on the GISP contracts that we use, for example, for 3DEP, there are folks, Megan has looked recently, there are a couple of contractors that do both hydrography and wetlands. I'm sure there's also opportunities to have subcontracting and whatnot. For CONUS, on the GISP side, for geospatial products and services at USGS for that contract vehicle, we haven't written one of these yet where we put everything in one contract. We haven't done one of those, so I'm not sure quite what it will look like. But I will mention, we do have the ability for USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service to move money and to put money on each other's contracts. And if we get a BAA up and running and get some funding for that, then we'll also have the mechanisms to partner with states. So, and that's something that we've been working on the paperwork for. We just don't have the funds for it right now. But I am hoping that in the future we'll be able to do these these together, but right now we haven't even tried one or even, kind of worked on what that would look like as a contract yet. So Jim, I guess maybe keep checking in with us. For everybody, I guess keep checking in with us, and maybe somebody will want to fund one of these, and we'll figure out how it moves forward.
Well, I'm going to skip the next question, and because Jim put another one in here, he's expanding the funding question. NOAA CCAP has funding from GLRI for 1 meter land cover in the Great Lakes. Can CCAP data be integrated with NWI/3DHP?
Kind of depends on what you mean by integrated. In a way, CCAP and NWI have had a relationship for quite a long time. So our data, have been used to help train or, calibrate, validate CCAP data. NWI data play a big role in producing CCAP data. What we're hoping for in the future is more of a reciprocal relationship where, yes, our data, NWI data, are used to help produce the CCAP data, but the CCAP data might be used to identify areas of change, within NWI data, and target areas that need to be updated. And we actually have some products that'll come out really soon that show that CCAP data are really excellent for doing that. Another possibility that we're looking into is whether or not we can pull some of the features or some of the classes out of the CCAP data and kind of massage it into the NWI data set to save resources. That's possible, but it's going to be harder to do. So I guess I would just say that there's been a relationship between NWI and CCAP, and we're working to strengthen that relationship.
Great, thank you.
Well, we are at 3:59, and given that this is probably the third time that we've gone over in the last 3 months, we might have to extend the meeting for another 30 minutes. So I will open it up to our speakers if there's any last comments, including Becky, they'd like to make. Any concluding remarks, we'd appreciate it.
Becky, you want to go ahead and then I can say a few words?
Just thanks to everybody for coming today. We've had great attendance, and we're really excited to be moving this forward. Megan and I have been working on this for a long time with other people at Fish and Wildlife Service and USGS, and we know it's important to all of you. So we'll keep working on it.
And again, I just wanted to, thank Linda and Becky for this opportunity, and thank everyone for their time. This was just, really great to start this conversation with everyone. And I would encourage you to not be strangers and to reach out to Sydney or I believe she sent the web link, so you now have all of our names and emails. And if you're interested in a regional coordinator for a region other than Alaska, you can find your regional coordinator at that link that Sydney sent out. So again, I just wanted to thank you very much and encourage you to reach out and be part of this process, because it really is an important process that I feel will better support our water data information needs into the future.
Sydney, any closing remarks?
Just thank you, everybody, for your time today, and absolutely feel free to reach out with questions. It's been an evolving process in Alaska, but we certainly have lessons learned to share, and hopefully we can get some of that into the Q&A document that you referenced earlier, Linda, but email is absolutely a great way if you have individual.
May I add that, sounds like a lot of activity going on here. So maybe we should put a pin in our calendar for maybe if if not sooner, this time next year, getting an update on both Alaska and these other pilot projects.
Thank you very much, Phil. Again, you all know that the forum is held the third Wednesday of each month. I did mention that for the next forum, we're going to start integrating a quarterly 3DHP interest group meeting. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that'll be December 15th, which will be our third Wednesday of the month. Same time, same place. We might be extending that invitation out to 4:30 p.m. So thank you all for your participation. Great turnout today. I know you're going to have questions, follow up with the presenters if Phil and I can help you. And we'll work to get this Q&A document up as soon as possible. So, and thanks to Emily for all her support, of course, too. So thank you all, and we'll see you next month.